Ransomware attacks continue to dominate the threat landscape, of course, and they're increasing. And criminals are using a new tactic, unfortunately, to carry this out. Lance Whitney joining me now to talk a little bit more about this. So, Lance, it sounds like they're using legitimate software.
Right, Karen. So traditionally, to carry out ransomware attacks, cyber criminals will use certain strains of malware, Emotet, Ryuk. These are pretty well-known names in the ransomware game and the malware game. But what's happening, and this is from a report from a company called Cisco Talos Incident Response, and I'm going to just refer to them as CTIR from this point, but it's a division of Cisco that's designed for cybersecurity. So they did a recent report, and they found out that cyber criminals are increasingly using legitimate tools, legitimate software tools to carry out the attack, to plan the attack, and to control the attack. And one tool they mentioned in particular is this item called Cobalt Strike. Cobalt Strike is designed as a type of software simulation that, that will test an organization's ability to thwart a cyber attack. And it's used for penetration testing, things like that. And obviously it's a legitimate piece of software created for legitimate reasons. But because it tends to be pretty powerful and effective, cyber criminals are increasingly using this to deploy malware and to control their ransomware campaigns. And there's actually an example here that the CTIR folks used to demonstrate how this works. So there was, in the example they sent me here, there was an engineering company that was infected with Lockbit ransomware. And what the Cisco people found out was that the attackers were using Cobalt Strike for their command and control purposes. And just to define that, command and control is a computer system or base of operations that cyber criminals will use to control the malicious attack. So it's a way of communicating with the infected machines. It's a way of sending commands to the malware and to the bots that infect the machine to basically tell them what to do, how to carry out this attack. So what the Cisco people found out was that after the systems were infected, the attackers were doing a lot of bad things here. They were performing group policy updates. They were compromising user accounts. Another thing they found out here is that the attackers were using this program called TeamViewer. So here's another example of attackers using a legitimate program for illicit or illegal purposes. TeamViewer is a known program for connecting to and controlling remote desktops. So in this case, the attackers were using TeamViewer for the same purposes, but obviously for illicit purposes. And ultimately what happened here, to cut to the chase, is the attackers were able to steal and encrypt the compromised data. And here's another trend that we see increasingly with ransomware attacks, is that in this case here, the data was actually posted on a website used by the Maze ransomware gang. So this is something that we're increasingly seeing as well, is that ransomware attackers aren't just encrypting the data and releasing it when the ransom is paid. Now they're increasingly threatening to publish the data publicly, which obviously is problematic. In the event of any kind of sensitive or personal data getting publicly exposed, can do a lot of damage to users or customers, and certainly to the organization. So this is another common tactic that we're seeing with ransomware attackers, attackers and something else that the Cisco folks are increasingly finding.
Okay, Lance, and let's go back quickly to Cobalt Strike. You know, the program there. Why are they using it? Why is it so effective?
Right. So I'm going to quote from someone at CTIR because she kind of nailed it on the head here. This is from someone named Amy Henderson, who is part of CTIR's strategy and operations group. And she wrote here, she told me part of the reason we're seeing so much Cobalt Strike activity right now is that it's basically prefab construction for malware. Adversaries can use it to plug in any gaps they might have so they can focus on the more profitable parts of the attack. So the issue here, or the irony here, is that Cobalt Strike is such an efficient program and such a powerful program in terms of penetration testing that the cyber criminals are able to use it for all phases and all aspects of the attack. And another quote that Amy gave me here that I thought was good is she said, as a common tool, Cobalt Strike offers everything from reconnaissance to post-exploitation tools. It gives threat actors all of the Lincoln logs to build their cabin, including the telephone poles to dial out. So this is really a toolkit that goes from soup to nuts. So cyber criminals can use it for all phases of a malicious attack or a ransomware attack, and it does a lot of the hard work for them.
Yeah, that's certainly makes it convenient for them, Lance. Okay, so finally, what are some of the recommendations that Cisco is passing on to help people, you know, to help try and thwart these type of attacks?
Sure. So Amy shared 5 different tips and tricks with me that I think are really worth noting. So one aspect here that's always good to remember is to use a strong email solution. And that's because email is really one of the primary ways that an attacker starts to gain access to an organization, to a network, whether it's through a phishing campaign or some type of malicious email. Much of the time, it's that initial email that gets into the organization, and an employee maybe clicks on the wrong link or clicks on a malicious file attachment or just follows some kind of red herring, and that then snowballs and leads to giving the cyber attacker access to an organization's network. So it kind of starts with email from that perspective. And then a second tip she gave here is to set up policies that limit the access for underprivileged users. So for example, most users should not need administrative privileges on their systems or on the network or on their domain. So Amy recommends that organizations really look at the accounts and look at the type of privileges that the average user has and make sure that they don't have more than they need to. So a third recommendation that she had here is to improve endpoint detection. And when we talk about endpoint, we're really talking about any area, any device, any system that a cyber attacker can compromise to gain access to a network. So that could be a server, it could be some kind of public hosting system, it could be a computer, it could be a mobile device, anything. Everything really has to be reviewed and protected, because anything is potentially an entry point for a cyber criminal to gain access. So improving your endpoint detection is really important to stop an attacker from infiltrating your network. A fourth tip kind of refers to back to what I touched on before. She mentions removing domain users from the admin group. And the same thing here is if a regular user doesn't need administrative access, doesn't need special privileges, there's no reason to give it to them. The problem with that is such an account can often easily be compromised. And once the cyber criminal has access to an account that has administrative privileges, especially on the network, they can run wild with that. So this is really an important tip, is to look at your accounts, look at your user accounts, and make sure that they don't have more access than they really need. And then the final tip here that's always important is to back up your critical data. Obviously, in the event of a ransomware attack, your sensitive data is being held hostage. You want to try to avoid paying the ransom, because that may not always get the data back for you. So in lieu of that, having a recent available, accessible backup of your critical data is really vital. So that way you can at least turn to your backups, you can recover your backups if your primary data source ever gets compromised and held for ransom.
All right. Well, definitely got to stay on our toes, Lance, and some great suggestions there to do so. We have much more, of course, on Tech Republic, on ransomware, and Lance's articles are all there. We hope that you all will check it out, and we appreciate you watching today.